Cannabis and campaigns. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol View is Peter Hancock of Capital News, Illinois, and Adriana Petrelli of the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just jump right into it with the subject of cannabis, which we seem to be talking a lot about these days, not only just on Capitol View, but in news pages. Lots of stuff has been printed and broadcast in preparation and anticipation of January 1st when legal recreational sales are set to begin. This week, word has come out about the wife of a prime sponsor of this, the wife of Kelly Cassidy. It turns out has now got a job or some sort of business relationship with a cannabis company that has an arm here in Illinois. Adriana, what's going on here?
Yeah, so her wife, her name is Candace Gingrich. She has worked for human rights organizations and the Human Rights Campaign for 23 years, and she has taken a job with, it's called Revolution. Like you said, it's based in Florida, but they do have a hub here in Illinois.
Yes.
Now, she wasn't hired until after the marijuana legalization bill was passed, and according to Cassidy as well as Revolution, she will not have any sort of financial interest or any voting interest. And so while people have raised questions, they say that there is no ethical violation behind this.
Whether there's an ethical violation or not, does this pass the smell test in this sense? I mean, we had a state senator who came under heavy criticism when she advertised, hey, if you want to get a cannabis license, come to my, symposium sessions or whatever, pay me some money, I can help you on the road to riches in the cannabis business. Peter, how does this land here? Are people believing that, hey, somebody who had this background, as Adriana pointed out, now is in the cannabis business?
Well, the immediate suspicion is that somebody is using their public office for private gain, either for themselves or for a member of their family. And so you have to ask that question.
Sure.
The bill passes, she's a primary sponsor of the bill, and the next thing you know is that her wife is getting a job with a company that's going to benefit from passage of the bill. That having been said, I don't know that you can come right out and say this was an act of corruption. Maybe she's perfectly qualified for the job. So, you know, it would take a lot more investigation if anybody wanted to do that investigation.
Sure. I mean, I think it's if nothing else, it's attracted some scrutiny. And let's make no mistake, I mean, this is going to be large business. I think there have been some recent transactions in the $850 million range for cannabis companies, including some based in Chicago. The industry is estimated to be worth as much as $1.3 billion, I think, at maturity. We're seeing, again, more stories. I wrote one today about concerns about a shortage and a lack of licenses. Would this even be an issue if the regulatory framework was somewhat different, where it was easier for folks to get licenses? It was more on a...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the interesting things about the Illinois law is that they have capped the number of licenses, I think both for producers and for distributors. I asked a number of times, you know, why don't you just let the market decide how many there should be and where they should go? And the answer was that they want controlled growth of this industry, and that in other states that didn't try to control the growth, you end up with a lot more product on the market than the legitimate distributors are able to sell, and it gets funneled back into the black market where, you know, they're not paying taxes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and in point of fact, now we're actually starting to see, I think, more interest in not allowing cannabis sales because the law does allow for a local opt-out.
Local opt-out, yeah, and some smaller communities around the state are saying we're not entirely sure this is what we want in our community.
Sure. I think Morton led the way. I think they were the first, which is not necessarily the world's largest metropolis in Illinois or what else, but now we're in some stuff out of suburban cities, some collar counties. How wide do you think that this might be? Is this just going to be a smattering, or is this going to be a large-scale number?
I think it's going to, it's going to go case by case, and it's going to depend on the political culture and other kinds of cultural factors within each community. I think here in Springfield, in fact, there's been some skepticism. I think they at least want to have a discussion about it before they go diving headlong into it. And yeah, it's the kind of thing that I think communities should discuss among themselves, whether or not this is, the kind of community they want to be.
Yeah. What do you think, Adriana? I mean, because for one thing that I'm looking at here, the tax structure isn't such, at least at this point in time, is potentially lucrative, I think, when it comes to the cannabis business on a local share. In other words, the locals would get some, but not a huge amount. So, I mean, is money out of the equation here as
Right.
folks try to make this decision?
Well, I think, like you said, they're going to get some money, and just because it's banned in your municipality doesn't mean you can't possess it. So people are going to go elsewhere. So if your residents are going to possess it regardless, it almost makes sense for you to want to reap the benefits of that. I mean, I get why you wouldn't, and I think that we're going to see, especially in more southern Illinois towns, a lot more red cities and municipalities probably are going to lean toward banning it, but that's not going to stop people from possessing it or going elsewhere. And
There is a quality of life issue involved in this, because I mean, I've heard stories coming out of Denver. I know people who go to Denver frequently where it's legal, people who go to Las Vegas, and they'll tell you in certain parts of town, and for a while in the hotels in Las Vegas, you couldn't get away from the smell of it.
Yeah.
It's a very pungent smoke that comes out, and it's unmistakable. You know it when you smell it. And in places where it has been legalized and not controlled very well, it does diminish the quality of life in the minds of some people. So I think, not just in the southern Illinois red communities. I think there might be some upscale suburban communities that say, we don't want that on our main street.
It's also up to the locals to decide, will we allow a cannabis lounge, so to speak, a hookah lounge, open consumption sort of thing? My understanding is you're not going to be able to walk down the street in any place and just light up on the sidewalk like you might be able to do with a cigarette.
Right.
But is the open use, I'm wondering how big of an issue that might actually really be at the end of the day. How many folks are really, because supposedly this stuff is super powerful. Do you sit around on a hookah lounge and I don't know how long would you want to stay? How much could you smoke? Is this going to be a big issue?
I don't personally intend to find out.
Where
But
is your spirit of adventure and researching ability, sir?
no, I just, I think this is primarily intended for people to be able to consume it in their own homes, the privacy of their own homes. I mean, you can't smoke cigarettes in a restaurant anymore, so I don't think you're going to be able to, light up a joint. There, certain hotels, maybe, hotel casinos might have some regulations. But I think, we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out in one community to another.
And the smell issue, I think, is an excellent one, not just, I think, from a burning consumption standpoint. Home grow is going to be allowed up to 5 plants, and 5 plants can produce a fair amount of smell, can they not?
If you have a medical cannabis
If you have a
card.
correct,
Yeah.
yes. I was speaking with a gentleman not long ago who has a cultivation operation. The specific spot is escaping me now, and he told me he's not worried about the home grow aspect, i.e., do you feel threatened or at all?
Yeah.
It's just this stuff smells so bad. It's just not something you really want in your house. The Attorney General this week took a step in the cannabis world. He wants the FDA to do what? He wants the federal government to do some sorts of standards for a substance that the federal government doesn't think is that good.
Well, and this is getting to be a concern across the country as more and more states start legalizing it. You have CBD products that are out there. You have marijuana products that are out there. There's no standards regulation, no standards for how these things are labeled, whether or not you have to disclose all of the different substances that are in it, because some marijuana, if it's grown in fields, it may be sprayed with herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers,
Roundup, reefer,
those sorts of things. And so, Attorney General Kwame Raoul is saying the FDA needs to start stepping in as a matter of consumer protection, which is their basic function in government. In addition to that, I think U.S. Senator Dick Durbin just recently called on FDA to start authorizing more federal research into marijuana and cannabis. And he pointed out that many states, including his home state of Illinois, have now legalized it. And so there are consumer protection issues that need to be addressed somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, the packaging thing I think isn't interesting. Having read the bill, there's some odd stuff, at least it struck me as odd. For example, it would be illegal to have a depiction of a marijuana leaf on a package that contains marijuana. That I don't quite get. And meanwhile, there are no prohibitions on CBD. Similarly, you can't claim health benefits for recreational marijuana under the Illinois law, but you can sell medical marijuana. Go ahead.
And the same thing goes for CBD. I mean, there are manufacturers of those oils and those products that are making extraordinary health claims, which may or I don't know if they're backed up by clinical trials and whether or not the FDA has approved. They certainly haven't approved any of these products either for safety or for efficacy. So it's time for, this industry is maturing, and as it matures, it needs to be, it needs to play under the same rules that other over-the-counter drugs and other food products have to play by.
It seems to me, because under federal law, marijuana continues to be, I believe, a Schedule I drug, i.e. no accepted medical use. It's in the same category
and
as
high
heroin.
Potential for abuse.
It's considered, actually, cocaine, for example, is not a Schedule I drug. It can be used. I don't know when, but it does have some recognized medical benefit so far as the feds are concerned. So I just wonder how realistic it might be, because Kwame Raoul is not the only attorney general who's asking for this. It's several of them, and so I mean, I think you're right. The industry is growing, blossoming, whatever you want to call it, but still, you seem to have a hurdle to overcome when it comes to the federal government.
Well, eventually the ball is going to be in Congress's court.
Sure.
They're going to have to resolve this issue because it's not sustainable to have the federal government with this policy of declaring it an illegal narcotic, and then more than half the people in the United States now live in jurisdictions where it's completely legal.
Sure.
That can't continue, and the pressure is going to build on Congress to move one way or the other.
Let's move off cannabis for a second, if we could, and hit the campaign trail. Rodney Davis, the congressman from Taylorville here in central Illinois, had a rare town hall meeting this week. It got a bit rambunctious. Either one up for grabs. What happened? What are we to make of it?
Yeah, well, it sounds like, I know that, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, President Donald Trump had said some things on Twitter, and people were questioning Rodney Davis's lack of failure to call out the president for being racist and saying these inflammatory things. And Rodney Davis finally made a comment and just said, "I don't think what the president said was racist." And so I know that caused a lot of uproar at the event, because this is the first time Rodney Davis has had an event in many years, and there were protesters. And I believe that it stemmed from that. But Rodney Davis's campaign has also been in the headlines.
Yes, it has.
Quite a bit. So recently, he had someone make a call to Betsy Dirksen Lodrigan's office and acted as if they were a college reporter, even though they were working for the campaign. And that's not something that is okay. Extremely unethical. Not sure the legality there, but so that has been in the headlines as well. And the campaign manager, basically, who oversaw this phone call, said that, he made a rookie mistake, but people are now questioning him because he's 29. He's, been working on campaigns and government for a while. It's not like he's a college kid overseeing this, or if, so Rodney Davis's campaign has been in the headlines, and not for great things.
Sure. I mean, he's got a couple things, I think, going on here. I mean, let's preface it by saying I think a lot of folks will remember that photograph from election night a few years ago when he ran against Betsy Lodrigan. For a few years, it's been less than 2 years. But the picture of people waiting to vote at University of Illinois that went all the way down the building, around the staircase, hundreds of people in line. And that wasn't going to be a crowd that was likely going to go for the incumbent, Mr. Davis. It was a close election. In fact, I believe CNN called it mistakenly for Betsy Dirksen Londrigan before Mr. Davis won in a squeaker. So I think it kind of reflects, he's got a real swing district here. I mean, it's not solidly Republican, it's not solidly Democrat, and I think that helps explain maybe why he has been so historically so reluctant to have these town hall briefing or meetings. And then this comes about, and there has been, we don't know. Well, Davis is saying, I didn't tell her, I disown her, I would never want somebody to do this, and let's make sure we recognize what this is. It's an absolute no-no to impersonate a journalist, which is what happened here. It was a campaign volunteer, and it's being called a rookie mistake. But then Davis went silent on this for 3 or 4 days. Should he have addressed the issue, A, sooner than he did? B, should we be satisfied with, I'm serious about this, we'll handle it eternally, and not saying exactly what you're going to do about it?
We're living in a different era now. First of all, with regard to the town halls, I can remember a number of Democratic members of Congress stopped having town hall meetings when the Tea Party first formed.
Yep.
Because they would pack the room and disrupt the event.
Sure.
And a lot of congressmen will tell you right now, you can reach a lot more constituents with just teleconference calls.
Yeah.
You invite people into a conference call. You can reach a lot more constituents that way. Than having an open town hall meeting where protesters show up and disrupt it. So it's been happening in both parties. With regard to, there's also been this development of these people called followers. The opponent's campaign will hire a college kid or something to follow the other candidate around, tape record every word they speak, and when there are press gaggles or whatever, I've seen this happen, they'll jump in there. They won't necessarily identify themselves as a reporter, but they'll sit there and act like one. And the real reporters know, no, this is a follower, he's not a real reporter.
But they never rarely, if ever, ask questions.
I find them an annoyance because I think press conferences are for the press.
Right.
On the other hand, sometimes they ask really interesting questions. You know, so I'm not entirely sure how to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the transcript of the record of the call, the person had given a fake name as Ben Sherman or something, and then asked this incredibly detailed, sophisticated question on campaign finance law. And who are you with again? Well, I'm with the SIU Daily Bugle. It just seemed like the sort of question that was, you don't really expect for a college student to say. But should Davis have done this sooner than he did? I mean, he waited 4 days or so before he said anything about it, and it was at the town hall meeting. And he didn't say exactly what he's going to do to stop this. He said the buck does stop with him. And remember, this is the last time around he had a drunken campaign volunteer crash a Londrigan event and ended up getting arrested for being so disruptive. So this isn't, a bad thing happened last time around, a bad thing has happened this time around. Do people even care about this? Do people actually get it that it's wrong to impersonate a journalist?
I think journalists care about it.
Yeah.
I think on election day, when voters go into the polls, it's a referendum on the incumbent, it's a referendum on the president, and campaign nonsense, I think for a lot of voters, it just, I don't think it's that big of a factor.
Okay, fair enough. Rodney Davis isn't the only person who's had some issues on the campaign trail. We have a Representative Sherry Bustos, who recently, just a few days ago, apologized for how she's conducted the Democratic Congressional Candidate Campaign Committee. That's the chief fundraising and campaign arm for Democrats in Congress to keep incumbents in. There apparently were few, if any, people of color on the upper echelons here. She did apologize. She appears to have realized or acknowledged the error of her ways. Is she in trouble here? I mean, is this a screw up or an admission that we're going to, we're past that, we're going to go on? Or has this caused any lasting damage, do you think, within the caucus?
The Democratic Party has vulnerability here. Every time they start arguing among themselves about whether or not one wing of the party is being ideologically pure enough or their actions are reflecting the values of the party, this plays right into the Republicans' hands.
Sure.
The Republicans, if you look at the polling numbers, Donald Trump is not in trouble among Republicans. They're solidly behind him. And one of the reasons you don't see a lot of Republicans jumping out and criticizing the president for what are perceived as racist comments is because they know that he's got a solid base behind him. And they may criticize him in private, but they don't come out in public to do it.
Right.
Which, you know, this is clearly a different president, but most presidents will act that way. It's like you don't have members of your own party calling you out. You want to call them on the phone and talk to them privately, fine. So this is the Democrats' vulnerability, and we've seen it play out in the presidential debate so far, where you've got the liberal, or what they call the progressive wing of the party, with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and you've got the standard bearer for the moderates in Joe Biden. And the more they fight amongst each other, and the more their little groups decide, you know, that can't be the Democratic Party, or that can't be the Democratic Party. I think, you know, the Democrats are running the risk of having a whole lot of their own people stay home because somebody in the party wasn't ideologically pure enough for them.
Yeah. I mean, Bustos has this reputation for knowing how to win a district, a swing district, and hold on to it. How valuable is that sort of insight and experience, coupled against she's apparently made some folks pretty upset here. I mean, how valuable is that sort of experience in her political abilities balanced against this?
I think it's very valuable, and I think you saw earlier Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot come out and say the same thing about the presidential candidates, is that, you know, you can have these arguments over Medicare for all and everything, but you need to start talking to people in middle America. You need to talk to people in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to win. You may win an ideological war within your own party, but you're not going to win the White House.
Yeah. Moving on to a different subject, this is kind of one of my favorite ick stories of the week. It was broken by both ProPublica and the Wall Street Journal. There is an outfit in Lincolnshire, Illinois, I believe, is the name of the community. It's headquartered there. Get your kids into college and at a very low, get your kid in and save zillions of dollars on the tuition bill. What it involved was wealthy, some folks would consider wealthy, some folks would consider the middle class, turning over guardianship of their children so that they can get advantages on financial aid, particularly MAP grants, which are supposed to be reserved for the folks who are more needy than these folks are. It's gotten a lot of legs. Again, it's been in both the Wall Street Journal and ProPublica. It's apparently completely legal. The woman who headed this company, still heads the company, gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal, said, I'm not doing anything wrong. It says right here in the regulations that I can do this, and she's apparently right. Now the governor says he's going to look into this. What can the governor possibly do?
I mean, he believes it's fraud. I believe he said, you know, it is fraud. He can at least look into it. Maybe he can't take them to court or anything if it's legal, but maybe he can make a way for the next legislative session to pass some sort of legislation that won't allow this. Because if you're thinking about it, these people are taking away money from people who actually need the money.
Sure.
Because they only have a limited amount of funds to give to students, and now those students who actually need it might not have the chance to go to college or might have to put themselves in more debt. And so I don't think he can really do anything necessarily, but he can at least look into it, figure out how this is happening, why this is happening, and then talk to lawmakers and see, is there anything we can do about this so it doesn't happen?
Sure.
It's an indicator of a broader trend, though. The cost of higher education is getting out of reach of many, you know, middle-class families.
Sure. It's like $36,000 a year tuition, room, and board in the University of Illinois, 32 to 36. Go ahead.
A lot of people don't make $36,000 a year, and it costs that much to send your kid. And, you know, there are people who are saying, you know, I've grown up here in Illinois. I work in Illinois. I pay taxes to the state of Illinois. And then when my kid grows up, I can't afford to send her to the University of Illinois. And so they start looking for other ways to. And admittedly, this is really gaming the system in a way we haven't seen
I don't know if it's
before.
fraud, but it's icky.
It's icky, and they're going to have to crack down on it. But longer term, state and federal officials need to start looking at how to bring down the cost of higher education, because it's just gotten too far out of reach for too many families.
I mean, the University of Illinois has said that they are looking at some of these situations here to make sure they're on the quote-unquote up and up. The Wall Street Journal, I believe it was Wall Street Journal, perhaps ProPublica, at any rate, they looked at 1,000 probates, I believe in Will County, and found 38 cases of this happening within the last year or so. I guess one interesting point or question I have is, does this go outside Illinois? Because we're talking in some cases, I think, federal money, which goes, I mean, ProPublica says it's continuing to look. So is what started in Illinois spread elsewhere? Does anybody have any guesses?
And, you know, maybe it's happening and it's just not as organized under a corporate name as it was in Illinois. But I think there are probably families all over the country who are doing whatever it takes to get their kids into higher education.
Right. Last, we have just 1 minute left, so we'll have to act quickly. Important bill signed into law here with the governor extending the statute of limitations for sexual assault crimes. Adriana, why did he do it, and will it make a difference?
Yeah, so currently the state law of the statute of limitations is the 10 years following an offense for victims who are 18 or older at the time of the assault. It will make a difference. I think it's a very important bill. It goes into effect in January. The measure wasn't super old. It was only from 2012, but that is now, the statute of limitations has been removed.
I mean, I think that got its start with Hastert and the scandals surrounding him. Couldn't touch him criminally because of the statute of limitations. Just throwing it out there, I wonder whether there might be any chances here. We've seen about the scandals in the Catholic churches and the archdioceses. I'm wondering if any priests or anybody affiliated with the church might be looking over their shoulder now. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out, I think. But yeah, this was something that had been there for a while, that the legislature hadn't been able to get passed, and now it's become law. I think maybe another feather in a well-feathered cap worn by Governor J.B. Pritzker. He's getting a lot of praise. So, but with that, we're out of time, and so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on Capitol View.